Okay, folks, this is going to be a real brief look at the military history of World War II, some of the main aspects primarily of diplomacy. Look at these World War II photographs. World War II posters. First, there's a big difference between how Germans and Japanese are portrayed. The one in the upper left, the Japanese kind of hulking, bent over, carrying a naked white woman. Lower left, Japanese animalistic, going after a white woman. What do we have? Oh, in the middle, look at that. In the middle, it's it's both Germany and Japan going after a white woman and her baby. When you ride alone, you ride with Hitler. Join a car-sharing club. American liberties at that time included sacrifice. Americans believed that they needed to sacrifice in order to achieve a means. We don't have that anymore. Today, American liberty includes not sacrificing to achieve a means. It's part of that whole mentality of a participation trophy, that you get something for doing nothing. Part of American liberty today is wanting services without paying taxes. Once again, that goes back to that whole participation trophy mentality. Well, we see the opposite of that during World War II. Americans believe they need to sacrifice. Americans believe they need to actually support the war and do something by savings bonds, car share, reserve or preserve, food, and other necessities. What are you doing about it? Stay on the job until every murdering Jap is wiped out. Well, here's the big three: war in Europe, war in the Pacific, and wartime diplomacy. In November of 1942, the U.S. and England England wanted it, and the U.S. said, what the hell, to invade North Africa. And, push the Germans out of North Africa. It was called Operation Torch. Like I said, it was launched in November of 1942. Americans and British swept across North Africa, then invaded Italy, at the island of Sicily, taking the town of Palermo. And I believe it was 2 days later that Mussolini was removed in a bloodless coup. What the U.S. commanders wanted, Eisenhower, he really wanted to invade Europe, and saw that Operation Torch, this southern invasion, was just slowing down the inevitable, which was the Allied forces needing to invade Northern Europe in order to take Germany. The two little raids were to inflict damage, to demonstrate to the Japanese that we had the power to attack their homeland, and primarily psychologically, to have a big boost of morale. The two little raids happened in April of 1942, so this is 4 months after Pearl Harbor. These are mid-sized bombers that will be retrofitted to launch off of a aircraft, the Hornet, the USS Hornet. However, there is no way that these bombers were going to be able to land on an aircraft. So the idea was drop your bombs over Tokyo and then land in China. Now, it didn't quite happen. One plane landed in the Soviet Union, and the rest crashed into China. So all the planes were destroyed. Most of the airmen made it back. Several will be captured by the Japanese and then assassinated. And the aircraft that landed in the Soviet Union, the Russians, who were our allies, basically arrested the crew and kept the aircraft. The battle in the Pacific was particularly personal because of Pearl and because of the Bataan Death March in the Philippines. Well, the Battle of Midway is important because it's going to stop Japanese incursion, and after that, the U.S. is going to push the Japanese back. Guadalcanal, Iwo Jima, Okinawa, we're getting closer and closer and closer to Japan itself. We've talked about this, the wartime diplomacy, the destroyers for bases, the Lend-Lease, the Atlantic Conference, which is going to establish what will become the United Nations, and the Greer incident, September of 41, 3 months before the attack on Pearl. German sub attacks the ship, the USS Greer. I believe Greer was a destroyer, and of course Germany says no, they didn't do that, that the Greer attacked the German sub first. Anyhow, the result of the Greer is FDR issuing his shoot-on-sight orders. So, I think I mentioned this before, several months before we're officially at war, we're really at war. So, short-term objectives, defeat the enemy, but which one? FDR believed that Germany posed a bigger threat to our national security. However, Americans' desire was to go after the Japanese because of, like I said, both Pearl and what happened in the Philippines. Here's a poster from Texaco. Go ahead, please. Take day off. Okay, first the stereotypical aspects of Japanese people is portrayed here. Once again, the idea is self-sacrifice or sacrifice. You work, you support the war effort. This is called total war. We don't have total war anymore. Now we have 1/10% of the population participating in the war, because that's our American liberties today. We're not going to let something like war get in the way of our lives. Long-term objectives, no territorial expansion, self-determination for the occupied people, free trade, freedom of the seas, disarmament. Where have we seen this before? Certainly these are all aspects of President Wilson's ideas for how we're going to recreate Europe after World War I. Well, there were several conferences that we're going to talk about here. First is the Casablanca Conference. Casablanca happened in North Africa in January of 43. What came out of Casablanca was the idea of unconditional surrender. The Germans, Germany and Japanese get nothing. They just surrender. The problem with unconditional surrender is that it could make the war longer. If you don't get any bonus for surrendering, there's no reason to surrender. You might as well just keep on fighting. Next we had Tehran, November of 43. This is when the Allies promised to open up a new front against Germany. Russia was just getting pounded, and Stalin wanted the Allies to help him out. Finally we had finally we had Yalta in 45. It's mainly Europe's post-war reorganization. It's about taking the German surrender. Europe would be cut in half. On the eastern part, the Soviet Union would take the German surrender, and on the western part, the United States, England, and France would take the German surrender. There's a few other minor aspects. Russia wanted to grab part of Poland and some of the other communist countries. Anyhow, it's primarily about the division of Europe, and it is, or most historians would say, the Cold War began. Finally, we have the Potsdam Conference in July 45. Churchill is kicked out of office. FDR is dead. This is about dividing Indochina. This is about taking the Japanese surrender, dividing Indochina north and south. North of this magic line, the Soviet Union and the Chinese would take the Japanese surrender, and south of that line, the United States, England, and France would take the Japanese surrender, effectively cutting both Vietnam and Korea in half. Okay, let's get to the end here. First, Germany. The beginning of the end is D-Day, the massive Allied amphibian invasion of Europe. It's going to be launched in the beaches of Normandy. U.S., Britain, France, Canada, Australia. I hope I'm not leaving anybody out. If so, let me know. They're going to invade. They're going to quickly run through France, pushing the Germans back. One minor German high point would be the Battle of the Bulge, in which Germany not only stops the U.S. Movement to Germany, but it actually pushes them back. Well, we get to Berlin in April of 45, and Germany surrenders May 7th. So the question is why? What took almost a month? And, well, the reality was Germany was in a god-awful mess. Economically, politically, socially, you name it. The Allies had known about the death camps, about the concentration camps, about the millions of Jewish people and others being killed. But it's a difference to actually see it, to have the Allied troops freeing these concentration camps. And so, there was not a lot of Germans who were willing to step forward and say, yeah, I'm in charge, I did all that stuff. So it's going to take a while to find somebody who's going to say, okay, I'll be the spokesman for Germany, we're going to surrender. Well, one of the more interesting aspects, I think, of the German surrender was called Operation Paperclip. The Germans had something that everybody wanted. The Russians wanted, the communists, and the Americans wanted. And that was a guy named Wernher von Braun and about 1,500 of his closest scientists. Wernher von Braun was the Nazi in charge of their intercontinental missile program, the V-2. He had something we did not, an intercontinental missile. Germany was able to fire a missile in Germany and land in England. That's an intercontinental missile. We did not have that. We had the atomic bomb, but no way of delivering it outside of dropping it from a plane. Germany had no atomic bomb, but they had a mechanism for dropping it from using a missile. So we wanted him, and we wanted his top scientists. And so, as Americans are taking the German surrender, and Germans are coming forward and surrendering, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, we are registering these people. And Operation Paperclip was the Americans taking the German surrenders had a list of about 1,500 scientists and physicists and others we were interested in. And Operation Paperclip was called Operation Paperclip because upon identifying one of these Germans who are surrendering, the American would put a paperclip on their paperwork, thus making it easier for the intelligence folks in the back room to identify and remove them as quickly as possible. We're going to bring Wernher von Braun and, like I said, about 1,500 of his closest, bestest scientists to the U.S., which is going to really piss off the Soviet Union and, to a lesser extent, Germany. The Soviet Union is going to go after who they believe to be scientists, and they were just all low-level technicians. This Nazi scientist and his fellow Nazi scientists are brought to the U.S., and what job is Wernher von Braun given? Well, in the 1950s, he's going to be charged with creating a rocket that will send Americans to the moon. He is a chief scientist for NASA. Well, then we next we move to Japan. We attacked Tokyo several times, to including the firebombing. We did firebombing in Europe as well. Dresden is the classic example. Firebombing was dropping bombs that would explode, I'd say about 50 feet in the air. They were chemical bombs in which they would be set on fire and it would rain fire, completely destroying everything. This is personal as well as government, civilian as well as military. So we continue to fight. We're in Okinawa. We were in the Philippines. Now what do we do? How do we end the war? Like I said, FDR dies in April of 45. We have a new president, Harry S. Truman, one-time ex-senator from Missouri. And for the most part, FDR kept Truman out of the loop with things like the atomic bomb and plans to end the war. So Truman becomes president, Germany's done, we turn our attention to the Japanese in the Pacific, and Truman says, what's your plans? Well, the Navy has something called Operation Starvation, in which basically the U.S. Navy encircles the Japanese islands, throw up a blockade, nothing goes in, nothing comes out. The people will start starving to death. After about 30 days, the government will surrender. Well, the problem with Operation Starvation is that there's going to be a lot of civilian casualties. So Truman says, no, what else you got? And the Army has a two-phase operation. First phase is called Operation Olympic. Second phase is called Operation Cornet. This is a massive U.S. invasion of Japan. Fall of 45 would be Operation Olympic. Spring of 46 would be Operation Cornet. It would take about 1 million U.S. troops to invade Japan, to take Japan. I believe D-Day was 250,000 troops, and that was spread over everybody. The casualty rate for the U.S. would have been about 60%, according to the estimate of the head of the Army. So that's about 60%. That's about 600,000 Americans killed or wounded. The mortality rate for the Japanese was slightly higher. A tremendous amount, of course, would be civilians, and it would take too much time. So Truman said no. And he turns to Plan C, and Plan C is something called the atomic bomb. And we had two. Well, we actually had three. We're only going to drop two. First one's going to be in Hiroshima, August 6th, 45, and the second one is going to be in Nagasaki, 3 days later on the 9th. So the big question is, why did we do this? Why did we go with some other plan? Well, one idea was taking the atomic bomb, taking the Japanese leadership, taking the Soviet leadership, because this is really about not just ending the war, but making the Soviets back down, and blow up one of these bombs on this, uncharted island in the Pacific, and demonstrate the massive destructive powers of our atomic bomb. And the problem with that is, what happened if it doesn't work? What happened if it doesn't go boom? And then everybody's going to know that we're working secretively on the super destructive bomb. So we dropped two, Hiroshima and Nagasaki. We're waiting for the Japanese to surrender. They don't after Hiroshima, so we drop a second one. Oops. Oh, there they are. Fat Man and Little Boy. Those are the nicknames of the two atomic bombs. Here they are. Fat Man and Little Boy. Different sizes, different shapes, based on the type of fissionable material. So these are the two. Like I said, we're going to have one in reserve. The Manhattan Project was the top secret, relatively speaking, project that developed the atomic bomb. Talking a little bit more about that when we talk about some American traitors who will be arrested by the FBI in the 1950s.